It was a Friday night, past midnight. I had been sitting at my kitchen table for 6 hours straight, my back aching, my eyes burning from the glow of 2 monitors. The apartment smelled like cold coffee and the takeout containers I'd been too busy to throw away. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and I finally looked down and saw 7 missed calls from my father. I knew what that meant. I called him back. He didn't say hello. He just said, "I saw the interview." His voice was the one he used when he'd already made a decision. Flat, precise. The same voice he used in depositions, the same voice he used when he told my mother she was wrong about something at dinner. My father, Richard Calloway, had been a corporate attorney for 31 years. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The coldness alone was enough to make a room go still. "Which interview?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Forbes. The one where you're sitting in front of that ridiculous neon sign." He paused. "You said you dropped out of law school. You said it on the record. Do you understand what that does to this family? Do you have any idea?" "Dad, no, we are done. Don't come to Sunday dinner. Don't call your mother. Don't reach out to your brother. As far as I am concerned, you made your choice the day you quit, and now you've announced it to the world like it's something to be proud of." His voice dropped even lower. "You are an embarrassment to this family. I did not pay for your education so you could play video games. Have you ever worked for years to build something real, something that was truly yours, only to have the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally call it worthless? Tell me in the comments." I read every single one. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said, "Okay." And I set the phone down on the table, and I sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at the code on my screen, at the world I had been quietly building while everyone in my family assumed I was failing. I was 27 years old, and I had just been formally disowned by my father over the phone. Let me back up. My father came from a family where the path was already drawn before you were born. His father was a judge. His uncle was a senator. He became a partner at Calloway and Reed before he was 40, named after himself, because that's the kind of family we were. My mother ran the household with the same precision she ran the charity committees she chaired. She had a calendar on the refrigerator that was color-coded by person and by priority. My older brother, Garrett, was in his 2nd year at Yale Law when I started undergrad. He was brilliant and ambitious, and he wore it like a tailored suit. He fit perfectly into the mold. I never did. Growing up, our Sunday dinners were not dinners. They were performance reviews. My father would sit at the head of the table and go around the room. "Garrett," he'd say, "what are you working on?" And Garrett would talk about moot court or some internship he'd lined up. And my father would nod and say, "Good?" Then he'd look at me. "Elena, tell me something useful." And I would try. I really would. I'd talk about a paper I was writing or a professor I liked. But the moment I mentioned anything outside the approved track, a design class I was auditing, a game jam I had entered on the weekend, his expression would close like a door being shut. "That's not a career," he'd say. "That's a hobby. And hobbies don't pay for the kind of life I expect you to have." My mother's version of the same message was softer but just as sharp. She'd touch my arm after dinner and say, quietly, "Your father just wants you to be stable, sweetheart." Is that so hard to understand? As if wanting something different from stability was a character flaw she was graciously overlooking. I started law school because I didn't know how to say no to the weight of all of it. The family name, the expectation, the way my father lit up when he introduced me at firm events. "This is my daughter, Elena. She starts at Georgetown Law in the fall." That version of me made him proud. I held on to that for 2 full years. The thing I could not explain to anyone in that family was that I had been building games since I was 14. Not the kind you download for free and forget about. Real games, with systems and logic and world building that took months of work. I did it secretly, the way other kids snuck out at night. While Garrett studied cases, I was writing code in my dorm room with headphones on, designing the mechanics of worlds that didn't exist yet. It wasn't a hobby. It was the only thing that made me feel like myself. By the end of my 2nd year at Georgetown, I was failing evidence and barely passing civil procedure. Not because I wasn't smart enough, because I was spending every spare hour on a project I'd started calling Hollow Circuit, an atmospheric puzzle game set in a flooded city where the rules of physics bent depending on how the player felt emotionally. It was strange and ambitious, and I was obsessed with it. I withdrew from law school on a Tuesday in March. I called no one. I filed the paperwork online, and then I walked to a park near campus and sat on a bench and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I could breathe. I didn't tell my family for 4 months. I moved to Austin, got a sublease on a studio apartment the size of a large closet, and used the money I had saved from a summer internship to buy the hardware I needed. I picked up remote QA work to cover rent. I told my parents I was taking a reduced course load. My mother accepted this without question. My father didn't ask. The interview was a mistake. Not the interview itself that was one of the best moments of my professional life, but I had forgotten, in the warmth of that moment, that my father had a Google alert set for the family name. So there I was, 31 and alone in Austin, formally cut off. No Sunday dinners, no phone calls, no safety net. Just me and a game that I had no guarantee anyone would ever play. I won't romanticize what came next. It was genuinely hard. The QA work dried up. I started doing freelance UI design on a contracting platform, billing $22 an hour, working 10-hour days, and then spending the evenings on Hollow Circuit. I ate a lot of rice. I turned the heat down and wore a coat inside when December came. There were nights I lay on my mattress on the floor and thought about calling my father, not to apologize, but just to hear a voice that knew me. I never did. What got me through was a Discord server. I had started posting small development updates for Hollow Circuit in an indie game community, nothing polished, just honest behind-the-scenes progress. A player named Priya, who made ambient soundscapes out of Austin, started commenting. She understood immediately what I was building, not just the mechanics, but the feeling underneath them. We started collaborating. She scored the entire game for a revenue share deal we wrote out on a shared Google Doc. Her music made the game something I could not have made alone. It made it emotional in a way that surprised even me. We launched Hollow Circuit on a platform for independent developers on a Wednesday afternoon. I had budgeted for modest expectations. 3,000 downloads in the first month would have felt like success. By Saturday, we had 40,000. By the end of the first month, the number was sitting at 280,000. A review from a major gaming outlet called it quietly devastating in the best possible way. Another one said it was the most emotionally intelligent game released this year. I was reading these reviews, standing in line at the grocery store, shaking, not entirely sure I was interpreting them correctly. Priya called me the morning the second big review dropped. Elena, she said, I think we made something real. The following 8 months were a blur of updates, community management, a second release that expanded the story, and conversations with publishers who had previously never returned my emails. We formed a proper studio, just the two of us and 2 developers we brought on. We called it Low Light Games. We kept our costs lean and our margins clean. And then, 14 months after launch, a production company based in Seattle that had recently expanded into interactive entertainment sent an email requesting a meeting. I flew up on a Thursday. I sat across a conference table from 4 people who had clearly done their homework. They talked about the emotional architecture of Hollow Circuit, the way I had always hoped someone in a position of power would talk about it. They talked about IP expansion, about an animated series, about integration into a larger creative ecosystem they were building. At the end of the meeting, the lead negotiator slid a folder across the table. I opened it. I looked at the number. $16 million for full acquisition of Low Light Games and the Hollow Circuit IP. Priya and I had agreed on terms beforehand. Any offer over $10 million, we'd take it. We looked at each other across a glass conference table, and the lead negotiator said, "We can give you the weekend." We didn't need the weekend. After taxes and legal fees, Priya and I each walked away with just under $5 million. I reinvested my share into a new independent studio and a fund Priya and I set up together for women in game development. I did not celebrate. I walked back to my hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed and felt a version of the same thing I felt the day I withdrew from Georgetown. Quiet. Like the air pressure had changed. Then I felt something else. Afraid. Like I had accidentally walked into a room I had no right to be in. That feeling lasted about 3 weeks. I moved out of the tiny studio apartment. I bought a house in East Austin, not a mansion, not an estate, just a real house, high ceilings, a yard, a dedicated studio space with good light and better acoustics. It cost $800,000 and it felt absurd and right at the same time. I put a neon sign in the studio that said, "Make the thing." That was the sign in the Forbes photo. The article came out on a Tuesday. By Thursday afternoon, I had 63 new messages in my inbox from people I had not heard from in years. Old college acquaintances, a professor who had given me a B- and apparently followed my career, and one email, brief and formal, from an address I recognized immediately. My father. He wrote 3 sentences. He said he had seen the article. He said he would appreciate a phone call at my convenience. He said that the family would be in Austin for a conference the following month and hoped we might have a chance to reconnect. Reconnect. I read the word and set my laptop on the couch and went and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the yard for a long time. He hadn't called when I moved to Austin with no plan. He hadn't called when I was eating rice 3 meals a day and keeping the heat off. He hadn't emailed when Hollow Circuit launched, which he would have seen because Priya had tweeted about it and tagged me and we had 8,000 retweets. He had gone 2 years without a single word. But now there was a Forbes article and a mention of an 8-figure acquisition. And suddenly, there was a family conference in Austin and a hope to reconnect. I knew exactly what this was. I had known it the moment I saw his name in my inbox. This was not a reconciliation. This was a recalibration. My father had seen the numbers and updated his assessment of me, and now I was worth talking to again. Not because I had changed. Because my balance sheet had, I replied. I said I was available Saturday the 18th. I kept it short. They arrived at 11 in the morning. My father drove. My mother sat in the passenger seat. My brother Garrett was in the back. They pulled into my driveway in a rental car, and I watched from the window as they got out and looked at the house, not the way you look at someone's home when you're happy for them, but the way you look at something you're trying to appraise. I opened the door before they knocked. My mother moved to hug me first. She was wearing a blazer and pearl earrings, which meant she had dressed for this the way she dressed for client dinners. I hugged her briefly and stepped back. She looked around the entryway with an expression that was trying very hard to be warm and landing somewhere closer to cautious. It's lovely, she said. Very Austin. Thanks, I said. My father shook my hand. He had never been a hugger. He looked older than I remembered, which surprised me, though I don't know why it should have. His hair was fully gray now. He looked at the house the same way he had looked at my mother's assessment, agreeing with it in principle but reserving judgment. Garrett nodded at me. He looked uncomfortable. He'd always been the one to carry out the family line, and right now the family line was uncertain, so he was waiting. I gave them the tour. I kept it even, informational, the way you'd show a house to an inspector. This is the main space. This is the kitchen. The studio is back here. I opened the studio door and stood aside and let them look at the equipment, the monitors, the wall of whiteboards covered in narrative maps and system diagrams for what I was building next. This is where you work, my father said. It wasn't quite a question. This is where I work, I said. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said, You've done well, in the tone of a man who is acknowledging a fact he finds slightly inconvenient. We had lunch on the back patio. I had ordered from a good local place tacos, grilled vegetables, everything laid out nicely. My mother talked about a renovation they were doing on the house in Georgetown. Garrett talked about a case his firm had won. Nobody said anything that actually meant anything for the first 40 minutes, and I sat there and watched them perform normalcy and felt nothing except a very clear, very calm awareness of what was coming. My father set down his glass. He folded his napkin. He looked at the yard, not at me. Elena, he said, I want to be straight with you. Please, I said. I know we've had our differences. And I know the last few years there's been distance. He paused, choosing words the way he chose words in a courtroom. Your brother is in a difficult position right now. He made some investments in a private practice partnership, a litigation boutique, very promising, and the capital structure has become complicated. The other partners pulled back further than anticipated. He glanced at me then, briefly. He needs a bridge loan, something to stabilize the practice while they restructure. We thought, given your current position. How much? I asked. My mother looked down at her plate. Garrett still wasn't meeting my eyes. My father said, 900,000. The number sat in the warm Austin air between us. I looked at my brother. He was 41 years old. He had done everything right. He had gone to Yale, passed the bar, made partner, built the life my father had blueprinted for him from birth. He had never questioned any of it. He had never needed to. And now the blueprint had cracked, and he was sitting at my patio table, the golden child, staring at his hands, waiting for the daughter my father had disowned over the phone to bail him out. I looked at my father. Here was a man who had been a partner at a named firm for over a decade, who owned a house in Georgetown and a property in Cape Cod, who had billed more hours at his rate in the last 2 years than I could estimate. He had the means to solve this problem himself. He had chosen to come here instead. I took a breath. And then I felt it the same thing I had felt walking out of Georgetown on that Tuesday in March, and sitting on the park bench after, and setting my phone down the night he disowned me. That clarity, that sensation of seeing something exactly as it is, without the distortion of wanting it to be something else. You didn't come to reconnect, I said. My voice was quiet. You came with a number. My mother looked up. Elena, that's Mom. I said it gently. Please. My father's jaw tightened. We're family. You told me I was an embarrassment to this family, I said. On the phone. 2 years ago. You told me not to come to Sunday dinner, not to call Mom, not to contact Garrett. You made the terms very clear. And then 2 years went by, and nobody called. Not when the game launched. Not at Christmas. Not when the acquisition was announced. Not once. I paused. And now there's a Forbes article and a number. Garrett finally looked at me. His face was pale. He looked like a man who knows he is in the wrong and has not yet decided what to do with that knowledge. My father said, I was hard on you. I know that. That's not an apology, I said. He didn't answer. Dad. I kept my voice steady. I had spent 2 years not having this conversation, and I wanted to have it cleanly, without anger, because anger would make it about heat instead of truth. You are a senior partner at a named firm. You have 2 properties and a retirement portfolio and 30 years of billings. You have the ability to help Garrett yourself. You chose to fly to Austin instead because you looked at the Forbes article and you decided I was now a resource to be accessed. I looked at him. That's what you always did with us. That's what those Sunday dinners were. We weren't your children. We were your investments, and Garrett has been underperforming and you want me to cover the position. My mother made a small sound. I don't say that to be cruel, I continued. I say it because I spent 27 years contorting myself trying to be worth something to you, and the night you disowned me was the night I finally stopped. And everything that happened after the game, the studio, the acquisition, this house, all of it happened because I stopped trying to earn something from you and started building something for myself. I stood up. My chair scraped gently on the stone pavers. I'm not going to give Garrett the money, I said. Not because I don't have it, and not because I don't want Garrett to be okay, I do. But if I write that check, I'm not helping my brother. I'm funding the idea that you can treat people as assets and call them back in when the market moves. And I won't do that. My father looked at me the way he had looked at the abstract sculpture I brought home from the welding class I took in secret when I was 16, the one I had spent a month on, the one I was so proud of. He had looked at it for a long moment and then said, without particular malice, just fact, what is the point of this? And I had taken it back to my room and put it in the closet. That sculpture was on a shelf in my studio now. I had found it when I was packing up my childhood things after the disownment. It was the first thing I unpacked in Austin. The guest room is made up, I said. You're welcome to stay tonight and fly back tomorrow, but I think you should know where things stand. My father stood. He straightened his blazer. He looked at me for a moment and I saw something cross his face that I could not entirely name. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but something like recognition. The way you recognize a person you've underestimated. He nodded once. He walked inside. My mother touched my arm as she passed. She didn't say anything. I think she understood more than she had ever let herself say out loud. Garrett was the last one up from the table. He stood and looked at me and said quietly, I should have called. Yeah, I said. You should have? He nodded and went inside. They left the next morning at 7. I made coffee. I watched the rental car back out of the driveway and turn onto the street, and I stood on the front porch with my mug and watched until it disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside. That was 8 months ago. The new studio is full now. Not of my family's approval. Not of the things I thought I needed when I was performing the role I'd been assigned before I was old enough to understand what roles were. It's full of the things I actually chose. Priya is here 3 days a week. We have 4 people on the new project and we eat lunch together at the big table I bought for exactly that reason. A woman named Constance, who runs an independent dev space downtown, has become one of my closest friends. She's 53, has 0 patience for self-doubt, and makes the best green chile I've ever eaten. On Friday evenings, we run a free game design workshop at the space for teenagers, mostly kids who've been told their passion is not practical, not serious, not a real career. I watch them light up when they see something they made move on a screen for the first time. I know exactly what that feels like. I think about my father sometimes. Not with anger, not anymore. I think about what it costs a person to live the way he lives, measuring everything by its return, holding everyone at arm's length until their value is proven. I think about how lonely that must be. I think about the fact that he is a brilliant man who spent his best years building a life that made him miserable and then tried to hand that life to his children and called it love. I think about the Sunday dinners, the performance reviews in disguise, the careful way my mother rearranged silverware when she didn't know what else to do. I think about Garrett, who followed every instruction and found himself 41 years old and still needing his father to solve his problems. And then I look at my studio, at the neon sign that says, "Make the thing," at the whiteboard covered in the map of the world I'm building next. And I feel something I did not have a word for when I was 25 and sitting on a park bench in March, finally off the track I was supposed to be on. I have a word for it now. It's called mine. My name is Elena Calloway. My father disowned me for building the wrong thing. He didn't know that the wrong thing would become the only right thing I had ever done. I did not get here because someone believed in me first. I got here because I kept going on the nights no one was watching. And slowly, one line of code and one honest design decision at a time, I built a world I actually wanted to live in. So let me ask you this. What are you building right now that someone in your life is telling you isn't worth your time? I want to know. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're still watching, thank you. It means more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe to Karma's Twist, because next week's story is going to make your jaw drop. You do not want to miss it.